Have you ever wondered in ancient times, women chose men who were warriors, kings, strategists, men who bled for what they believed in and carved legacy from dirt and blood. But as centuries passed, the definition of strength got diluted. Suddenly, poetry and party tricks replaced purpose. External charm replaced internal character. Modern society glorified the loudest voice, the flashiest smile, the man with the best filter. And in the chaos, the Sigma male, the quiet observer, the disciplined outlier, the man with mental armor became the joke. They laughed at his detachment, mocked his silence, misread his calm. They labeled him cold, arrogant, boring. He didn't fit their fantasy. But fantasy eventually fades and reality always demands strength. When the noise collapses, when the chaos turns on itself, when charm can't fix the fire, guess who they run to? The Sigma, the one they overlooked, the one they once laughed at. They mock what they don't understand until what they mock becomes their only lifeline. Let's unravel 10 truths about what happens when the world finally realizes the joke isn't him, it's on them. 1. He wasn't ignoring you. He was observing everything. The quietest man in the room already saw the exit, the threat, and the betrayal before anyone else noticed. While the crowd was busy performing, the Sigma was calculating. He doesn't interrupt the show. He watches it unfold. He doesn't rush to speak. He lets others reveal themselves. People mistook his silence for absence. They thought he wasn't paying attention because he wasn't reacting. What they failed to see was that he was 10 steps ahead, studying behaviors, learning weaknesses, seeing lies wrapped in smiles. So when things fell apart and they all looked confused, he wasn't surprised. He saw it coming. He always does. They laughed at him for being too quiet until they realized he was the only one who didn't get blindsided. 2, he didn't blend in because he was built to be the exception. You don't lead wolves by becoming a sheep. Most people are conditioned to blend in, dress alike, talk alike, think alike, but the Sigma didn't conform. Not out of rebellion, but out of truth. He was never meant to fit into a world built on illusions. So they pointed fingers, laughed at the lone wolf who didn't play their game, but deep down, they envied his freedom. Then crisis hit. Suddenly, everyone looked to the man who was already outside the burning building, the man who didn't follow them in the first place. They wanted to tame him. Instead, they ended up depending on him. 3, he refused to compete because he was in a league of his own. A lion doesn't compete with hyenas for scraps. Competition is the currency of insecure men. It's a frantic race to nowhere, where loudness is mistaken for leadership and comparison replaces clarity. But the Sigma doesn't compete, he builds. He isn't interested in flexing his wins or being ranked by a system designed for mediocrity. While others fought for the spotlight, he quietly constructed a world that doesn't require approval to validate its strength. He went where no one else dared, into discomfort, into solitude, into full ownership of his vision. They mocked his quiet ambition, laughed at his independence, and confused his detachment with weakness. But when the dust settled, when markets crashed, alliances crumbled, and hype faded, his empire still stood. Because it was built on mastery, not on borrowed trends. And here's the irony. The world ridicules what it can't classify. Then it bows to what it can't replace. They stopped laughing when they needed what only he had the discipline to build. 4, he didn't fight for the mic because he controls the frequency. Real leaders don't talk over crowds. They speak so clearly that the noise has to die. They tried to out-talk him, out-joke him, outshine him, mistaking noise for presence. But the Sigma doesn't speak to impress, he speaks to impact. Every word he says is calculated, distilled, deliberate. There's no filler in his language, only fuel. And when he does speak, the room doesn't just quiet down, it recalibrates. Eyes shift, breathing slows, attention realigns. Not because he's loud, but because his words land like precision strikes. The truth, when spoken by someone who has no agenda, no performance to maintain, no ego to inflate, hits differently. People mocked his silence until they heard what it concealed. One line from him carried more gravity than hours of noise from the crowd. That's when they realized His silence wasn't emptiness, it was loaded. They laughed at his silence, then they heard him speak once, and suddenly they wished they'd listened sooner. 5. They tried to trigger him, but he was immune to emotional blackmail. A man who governs himself can't be ruled by others. They pushed, tested, prodded, mocked his restraint, tried to get under his skin, threw their tantrums, weaponized guilt, and sprinkled it all with false concern. Just waiting for him to lose control. But the Sigma never gave them that satisfaction, because he's not wired for emotional slavery. He's mastered himself so deeply that external drama has no place in his system. You can't shake a man whose foundation is made of granite. They tried guilt, shame, silence, manipulation, but they forgot he's been through storms that broke stronger men, and he came out cleaner. He's been burned before, and now he's fireproof. He responds only to truth and purpose. Everything else is just static in the background. They laugh because they couldn't pull his strings. But now they fear him because he sees every one of theirs. 6. They called him arrogant because his standards were non-negotiable. When mediocrity becomes the norm, excellence feels offensive. The Sigma doesn't lower his standards to appease the masses. He doesn't flatter dysfunction or make room for weak boundaries. So naturally, people labeled him arrogant because he refused to play dumb to make others comfortable. But arrogance is loud. The Sigma's discipline is silent. His expectations aren't just for others, they're forged first for himself. That's what makes them immovable. When those around him wanted shortcuts, he chose sacrifice. When they needed constant reassurance, he moved in solitude. His excellence wasn't accidental, it was self-engineered. And when it all crumbled, they returned not for comfort, but for clarity. The same clarity they once couldn't handle. 7. They tried to break his rhythm, but he doesn't dance to noise. Distraction is the drug of the directionless. Everyone else ran on trends. New routines, new distractions, new validation loops. The Sigma? He stuck to his blueprint. While they scrolled, he sharpened. While they posted, he planned. While they partied, he prepared. They laughed at his routine, called it boring, but his repetition was ritual, not rut. He didn't need chaos to feel alive, he had a purpose. And that made him untouchable. So when the economy tanked, relationships failed, and fake leaders collapsed, he was ready. He didn't have to pivot, because while they danced for relevance, he built relevance. 8. They saw independence as a threat because they needed control. The truly independent man triggers those who survive by dependency. The Sigma's self-reliance is more than financial or social. It's emotional. He doesn't need a crowd to feel valid, a partner to feel whole, or applause to keep moving. And people who survive on external validation, that rattles them. His refusal to be controlled exposes how controlled they really are. They'll shame his solitude, ridicule his detachment. But beneath that mockery is fear, a fear of someone they can't manipulate. That's why when they fall apart, they run to him, because the one who needs nothing becomes the one who can handle everything. 9. They exiled him socially until the fire needed a firefighter. Exile the real ones until reality sets the room on fire. They didn't invite him, didn't include him, thought his presence dimmed the vibe. He wasn't fun, wasn't light. No, he was real, and that's dangerous in a world addicted to pretending. But when problems get real, people don't call the clowns. They call the grounded. And suddenly the Sigma once ignored is the one they're all looking for. Because when the fire breaks out, they remember who didn't run when it was just smoke. And he doesn't come back to fix it. He comes back to end it. 10. They needed him most when he'd already let them go. By the time they realize your value, you've already outgrown their need. Here's the final savage truth. The Sigma never stays where he isn't respected. He doesn't cling, doesn't chase, doesn't wait for them to wake up. By the time the world realizes he's the man they need, he's evolved into someone they no longer deserve. He won't seek revenge. He won't rub it in. He'll just be gone. And that's the sting. They laughed when he was building alone. Now they sit in silence, knowing the man who could have saved them is already too far ahead to turn around. On a final note, the most dangerous man is the one they laughed at and then needed. The Sigma doesn't flex, doesn't fight for credit, but the world has a brutal way of showing who really held the foundation together. Let them laugh, let them mock, because when the facade falls and the fire comes, he'll be the only one left standing. Not because he wanted the spotlight, but because he prepared in the shadows. And when the crowd goes quiet and the filters fall off, and all that remains is reality, the man they laughed at becomes the man they run to. Too late.